On a cold winter morning in New York City, the air bit against the skin and steam curled from the manholes like breath from the city itself. The streets glimmered under pale sunlight as taxis slid by, and people hurried, chasing warmth and time. Among them walked Richard Shaw, a man whose name carried weight in boardrooms, but silence at home. He was the CEO of one of America's largest tech firms, a man who had built empires out of code and ambition, yet could not rebuild the life shattered 3 years earlier when his wife passed away. Success had become his armor, routine his refuge, and loneliness his shadow. Every day was the same: coffee before dawn, meetings stacked like bricks, and a car waiting precisely at 8. To the world, he looked composed, efficient, invincible. Inside, he was a quiet storm that never found release. That morning should have been no different. The investors were happy, the numbers soaring, and another headline whispered his brilliance. Yet even victory tasted like ash. As he stepped out of the glass tower onto Fifth Avenue, his phone buzzed with another reminder, another call to motion. But before he could answer, something cut through the hum of traffic. A sound faint, thin, but undeniable. It was the sound of a child crying. Not a tantrum or complaint, but a raw, trembling cry that seemed to scrape the cold air itself. Richard froze. He had heard such sounds before in this city, echoes of countless struggles hidden behind walls and corners, and like everyone else, he had learned to walk past them. But this one stayed. It clung to him. He followed the sound into a narrow alley between 2 old brick buildings. The light dimmed, the noise of the street fading behind him. The cry grew clearer, weak, rhythmic, soaked in fear. Then he saw her. A small girl, no more than 8, huddled against the wall, a thin blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Her face was dirty, her hair tangled, and in her lap lay another child, much smaller, pale, motionless. The sight rooted him to the spot. The older girl looked up, her eyes swollen and desperate. "Sir, can you help me? My sister won't wake up. She's cold." Richard's breath caught, and for a moment time itself seemed to hold. He knelt beside them, his expensive coat brushing the wet concrete. The smaller child's lips were cracked, her skin colorless, her hands stiff. He touched her wrist, cold, lifeless, and then there it was, a faint beat, fragile, but there, a heartbeat. "She's alive," he whispered, disbelief cracking through his control. The girl gasped, clutching her sister tighter, as if that word itself could summon warmth. Without thinking, Richard shrugged off his coat, wrapping it around the small body, lifting her carefully into his arms. She weighed almost nothing. "We're going to help her," he said, his voice unsteady, half command, half prayer. Out on the street, the morning light struck his face, harsh and bright. Cars swerved, horns blared, but he didn't flinch. He hailed a cab, shouted for St. Luke's Hospital, and slid inside with both children. The older girl sat beside him, silent, holding her sister's tiny hand as the city rushed past. Richard stared through the fogged window, the skyline a blur of glass and smoke, and felt something strange inside him stir, a feeling he hadn't known in years. As the cab cut through the cold, he realized that this wasn't another problem to solve or another deal to close. This was a life calling him back. For the first time in forever, he wasn't running from pain. He was running toward it. Because maybe, just maybe, saving someone else was the only way to save himself. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to like this video and subscribe for more stories that remind us kindness is never out of business. The ambulance roared through the frozen streets, its siren cutting the morning quiet like a wound. Richard sat beside the stretcher, his hands gripping the edge, as if that thin sheet of metal could keep the world from falling apart. The more petite girl lay beneath a silver blanket, her chest rising and falling faintly, the sound of life barely whispering through the oxygen mask. Across from him sat the older sister, Anna, her small fingers twisted together, trembling, eyes wide with exhaustion and fear. The paramedic asks questions, name, age, address, but she spoke softly, her voice shaking. "We don't have one," she said. "We live behind a store sometimes, or near the subway." Richard's throat tightened. The words hit harder than any loss in business ever could. For the first time in years, he didn't know what to say. At St. Luke's Hospital, the emergency room lights were blinding. Nurses moved like wind, pushing, shouting, codes, the world spinning in bright white urgency. Richard followed as far as they would allow, watching the small body disappear behind swinging doors. Then the noise faded, and there was nothing left but the antiseptic air and the sound of his own heartbeat. He sat down in a hard plastic chair, elbows on his knees, eyes on the floor. Anna sat beside him, silent, clutching a small, torn bag, the only thing she owned. "She's going to be okay," he said finally, his voice quiet, almost pleading. Anna didn't answer. Hours passed. Coffee turned cold in paper cups. Every tick of the wall clock felt like a lifetime. When the doctor finally approached, his voice carried the calm of someone who had seen too much. "She's stable," he said. "Severe malnutrition, dehydration, exposure to cold, but she's strong. She'll make it." Relief hit Richard like a wave. He closed his eyes, exhaling a breath that shook slightly on the way out. Anna said nothing, only nodded and wiped her face with her sleeve. "You did well," he told her softly. "You kept her alive." She looked at him then, those dark eyes so full of things no child should understand, and whispered, "I tried." Later, a woman in a gray suit appeared. Clipboard, badge, practice smile. "I'm from Child Protective Services," she said. "You were the one who brought them in?" Richard nodded. "Thank you for your help. We'll handle it from here." Something in that tone made him stand straighter. "Handle it?" he asked. "They'll be placed in foster care," she explained, her voice smooth, efficient. "It's procedure." Anna looked down, gripping her torn bag tighter. "No," Richard said, quietly. "They're staying with me." The social worker blinked. "Sir, that's not how it works." "Then tell me how it does," he replied, calm but certain. Years of boardrooms had trained his voice to command, but this time it wasn't power, it was conviction. That night, after the hospital grew quiet, he stayed. He bought Anna soup from the cafeteria, but she barely touched it. Instead, she sat beside her sister's bed, whispering stories to keep her asleep. Richard watched her from the chair by the window, the city glowing far below, cars streaming like veins of light through darkness. He thought about all the nights he had spent alone, staring at numbers, chasing profit, convincing himself that work could fill the hollow place his wife left behind. Yet here, in this cold hospital room, surrounded by two strangers with nothing, he felt more human than he had in years.
As dawn crept through the blinds, he made a call. His lawyer answered groggily. "Richard, what's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," he said, voice low but sure. "I found two girls yesterday. They need help. I want to become their guardian." Silence on the line. "You know that's not simple," the lawyer said. Richard smiled faintly, watching Anna asleep beside her sister, her hand still holding the child's small fingers. "Neither is living with regret," he replied. The call ended. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was finally doing something that mattered. The sun rose over Manhattan, bathing the skyline in gold, but Richard didn't look out the window. He was looking forward. If you believe kindness still matters, share this story and subscribe for more real moments that remind us humanity isn't lost. It just needs to be found again. Weeks turned into months, and the rhythm of Richard's life changed quietly, almost without his noticing. The sterile walls of St. Luke's gave way to the soft noise of home. The townhouse that once echoed with silence now carried the small sounds of living: laughter, footsteps, and the faint humming of cartoons in another room. Anna went to school each morning with a backpack nearly as big as she was, and Lily learned to giggle again. Richard found himself smiling more often, learning the strange, wonderful chaos of breakfast cereal and forgotten homework. Yet he knew peace was never permanent. One morning, a letter arrived from Child Protective Services, summoning him to court for a custody hearing. The words were polite but cold. The state would decide if he was fit to keep the girls. That night, he couldn't sleep. The city outside was still and silver under falling snow. He sat by the window, a cup of untouched coffee cooling beside him, watching the flakes collect on the sill. In his hands were two photographs, his late wife smiling in one, and Anna and Lily laughing in the other. He whispered into the quiet, "I won't lose them too." The courthouse the next morning smelled of old paper and polished wood. The echo of footsteps filled the marble hall. Inside, the hearing room was small, crowded, and tense. A judge sat behind a high desk, glasses low on his nose, while the social worker read her report in an efficient, detached voice. She spoke of rules, waiting lists, and adoption procedures. Richard listened, jaw tight, one hand resting over Anna's. When the judge turned to the little girl and asked softly, "Who do you want to stay with?" the air seemed to vanish from the room. Anna stood, hands shaking but voice steady. "With him, Your Honor. He didn't know us, but he cared. My sister's alive because of him. He gave us a home." Her small words struck harder than any speech. For a moment, no one moved. Even the social worker lowered her gaze. The judge removed his glasses, rubbing his eyes before speaking. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "the law must listen to the heart." The gavel struck once. Custody granted. The sound felt like sunlight breaking through the clouds. Anna burst into tears and threw her arms around Richard's neck. He held her close, unable to speak, the smell of her hair mixing with salt and relief. Outside, the snow kept falling, thick and gentle. As they drove home, Lily slept in the back seat, her head against her sister's shoulder. "We're going home, right?" Richard smiled, eyes wet. "Yes, sweetheart, for good." When they reached the townhouse, evening light spilt across the floor. The house no longer felt hollow. He lit a candle beside his wife's photo, the flame trembling softly in the draft, and whispered, "Thank you for sending them to me." Behind him came the sound of laughter. real, alive, warm. He turned, smiling fully for the first time in years. The city outside kept moving, impatient and bright, but inside those walls, time slowed, held gently in the quiet truth that life can begin again, even after everything. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because every act of kindness lights a spark that can change someone's life forever.